If you don't have sales, you're not going to have starts in the future. And this is why we see things getting worse before they get better. We have these promises to double housing starts, and we're not even treading water. Like things are going down.
Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Sabrina Maddeaux.
And I'm Mike Moffatt.
Today, we're talking about the complete evaporation of new home sales in Southern Ontario.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. So, Sabrina, I'm in Ottawa and I'm not going to be buying a home anytime soon. Next home I buy might potentially be for my kids a long time from now. But you're in the GTA where we've seen prices go down by about 20% or more since early 2022. But does it really feel any easier today to buy a home than it did back then?
No, absolutely not. The affordability crisis is still very real. Prices surged by so much over the last, decade and more that prices are still very disconnected from incomes. And saving a down payment is practically impossible still without family help or an inheritance. And at the same time, you have rent prices remaining very high, even though they're coming down a little bit, which complicates saving even further. So I don't think I'll be buying a home anytime soon either. Now, it seems I'm not the only one, though, who thinks it's tougher to buy a new home these days, despite some price decreases. Earlier this week, the Missing Middle Initiative released a report in partnership with the Residential Construction Council of Ontario, which examines new housing starts and sales in 34 municipalities across Ontario. Now, I've read the report, and the word that comes to mind is bleak. Mike, can you give us an overview?
Yeah, absolutely. That we have seen starts and sales go down. So the market itself is telling us, hey, there's a problem here. And there's four big takeaways from the report, which was authored by our MMI colleague, Jesse Helmer. We'll link to the report in the show notes. Four big takeaways here. The first is that Ontario's housing slowdown is not isolated to the city of Toronto. We often hear this that, oh, well, this is kind of a downtown Toronto problem. But we're seeing it all across the GTA and the greater Golden Horseshoe. So this is Brantford, Kitchener-Waterloo, St. Catharines, Peterborough, Barrie, you name it. This isn't just a downtown Toronto problem. The second thing is that the slowdown isn't isolated to high-rise condos. We're seeing massive drops in activity in ground-oriented housing. So that's your single detached, your semi-detached, your townhomes, and so on. The third point is, as bad as housing starts are, and they are really bad right now, pre-construction sales are even worse. So that means that things are going to get worse on the start side before they get better. And number four, that we talk about housing and housing starts in context of things like housing targets, and those are really important. But there's broader economic consequences here. We estimate that 21,000 person years of employment will be lost due to falling housing starts in just the first 6 months of 2025 alone. So we're talking about like 20,000 or more jobs. So this has big ramifications. So then what Jesse did was he assigned grades to each municipality based on 5 categories. We came up with a very objective scoring system. And once we ran the numbers, 22 out of 34 municipalities get an F for their housing performance. And that's probably only going to get worse.
On your first and second point, we've done a few episodes about the implosion of the condo market, and we can link to those in the show notes. But what this report shows us is that the slumping market isn't just about condos. So what's going on with all the other types of homes?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did specifically is look at the first quarter and second quarter of 2025. So the first 6 months of 2025 and compare that to an average of the first 6 months of the 4 previous years. So going back from 2021 to 2024. And condo starts are down about 54%. Now, that's offset a little bit by purpose-built rentals being up 8%. And the story we hear there is that with higher interest rates and so on, that investors have left the market. Investors were driving a lot of this activity, and they've gone away. And now we don't have a market, particularly for those kind of shoebox condos, as you and Ron Butler like to call them. All of that is true, but there's more going on than that. That ground-oriented housing, again, your single detached, semi-detached townhomes and things like that, those starts are down 42%. So not as much, but pretty close. And it's just a combination of interest rates that people can't qualify for mortgages, with interest rates being where they are, and 200 points on the stress test and so on, coupled with the fact that we have a pretty weak economy. So, people are worried about their jobs. They're worried about, okay, if I make this big investment, am I going to be able to pay it off? Am I going to be employed 2 or 3 years from now? So it's just put a chill in this market. So it was one of the points we really wanted to get across. And I think Jesse did a great job of this, of showing that, hey, this is not just a shoebox condo issue. We're seeing this across all housing types.
Mhm. I'd like to drill down on another one of your points that sales numbers seem to be worse than starts. First of all, can you remind us all what a start is? And what does it mean that sales are worse than starts?
Yeah, and this is everybody kind of gets confused about this, even policymakers themselves. What a housing start is. That I think you and I, when most people would think of it as just a shovel going into the ground, or
Mm.
maybe somebody getting a building permit or something like that. Well, the CMHC counts a housing start as once the foundation is all done and built to what they call grade, or basically ground level. So for an apartment building, imagine if you have an apartment building with an underground parking garage. It could take like 2 years for that foundation to be completed. So you have 2 years of work before the CMHC says that work has started. So it's a little bit of a weird metric. And what it kind of shows is that it's what economists call a lagging indicator. It kind of shows the health of the market a few years ago. Whereas pre-construction sales, which involve, people actually putting down a deposit, a down payment and saying, okay, yeah, I want to buy that condo, or I want that single detached home or so on, they give you a much better real-time indicator of where things are going. And we see that condo pre-construction sales are down 89%. They've fallen to basically 10% of what they were. And again, a lot of that is investor activity. But even if we look at ground oriented homes, which largely aren't investor activity, that's usually families putting down a down payment, those are down 70%, which is a massive reduction. And since, this year's pre-construction sales are 2026's or 2027's housing starts, if you don't have sales, you're not going to have starts in the future. And this is why we see things getting worse before they get better.
Hmm. Now, in 2022, the Ford government set a target to build 1.5 million homes over the coming decade. Is there any conceivable path to actually get there by 2032?
Well, this was always a massive stretch goal, but theoretically, back in 2022, if we had all three orders of government working together, making the necessary change, we might have been able to get there. It would have been tough. And even a year ago, it was probably impossible or close to it. Right now, no, it's not going to happen. According to the provincial government's own schedule, we need to be hitting like 150, 175,000 a year. We're going to be lucky this year on starts if we get to 75,000, like half of what we need. And we're likely to come in even lower than that. So this is a challenge we have both provincially and federally, where we have these promises to double housing starts, and we're not even treading water. Like things are going down. The CMHC says that across Canada, they're projecting housing starts to fall by 3 to 4% a year every year through 2027. So it's not even a matter of us trying, doubling housing starts and keeping that promise. We can't even keep them level, and that's a problem.
Then I have to ask, do you have any good news for us?
No. Simple
No?
answer.
Okay. Okay.
No, unfortunately not. If I'm trying to be an optimist here, I would say that, the first step to solving any problem is admitting that you have one. So, we're hopeful that this report will really wake people up. But no, there's not a lot of good in this. There's a couple, apartment starts in Brantford. There are a couple of municipalities with decent grades, but for the most part, you nailed the description. This is a very bleak report.
Now, speaking of admitting you have a problem, despite the fact that we're nowhere near those 1.5 million promised homes, Ford's government got reelected this past spring with a resounding majority. But there still seems to be this real lack of political pressure to actually make these builds happen. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think there's a few things going on. That first, I think every kind of order of government is waiting for the other to act, and we saw this. We saw the Ford government say, "Hey, we would cut HST on new homes if the federal government does so." So there's this kind of game of chicken going on, and cutting the HST either temporarily or permanently on new homes absolutely would help get shovels in the ground. So I think that's part of it. I think part of it is that policymakers still kind of see this as a kind of shoebox condo problem and say, well, we don't really want shoebox condos, so we're not going to lose too much sleep if we stop building those, even though it costs 21,000 jobs. They say, well, this is going to be kind of a market correction. And if that was the only thing going on, I could say, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I get the logic. But I think part of it is that they're just a little bit in denial about how widespread the problem is. And then finally, I think it's just money, that whether it be GST or some of these other things, they're not free. Though I would say if you're not selling any homes, you're not collecting any GST. So, at the end of the day, 0% of something is the same as 8% of nothing. It's nothing. So you'd be better off stimulating those sales and then getting it back in income taxes and stuff like that. So that's my take. I would love to hear your take. You're a little bit more politically attuned than I am. So, why do you think we're just not seeing that movement?
All the reasons you listed. And I do think the point about tax revenue is a good one. I think psychologically, they're worried that it will lead to less, even though, like you said, if you're getting zero sales, then you're getting zero taxes. So they should do the math on that. But as we know, politicians just aren't accountable to
Mm.
obviously people who don't live already in their communities. So future homeowners, people who want to buy, just haven't been able to organize in a way that has been effective enough to really capture politicians' attention. And so they find it easy to ignore these constituents who are often younger as well. But I do think that the issue is getting more media attention, more headlines. And now that it's rolling into bigger unemployment numbers and, developers we see are running into more financial trouble, I think that pressure will build, even if it doesn't end up coming from younger people and potential homeowners themselves. So hopefully we will see more attention on this soon. Thank you everyone for watching and listening, and to our amazing producer, Meredith Martin.
And if you have any thoughts or questions about what it means for a foundation to be at grade, please send us an email to missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next time.